Time for Focus, and today on International Migrants Day we have a report from Germany on the integration of refugees. About 50 refugee teachers, including Syrians, have been able to reconnect with their profession after accelerated German language training. A dozen of them joining schools in the eastern state of Brandenburg. Anne Meyer and Jessica Saltz sent us this report.
When she left Syria 2 years ago, Alaa KASSAB left everything behind her. Her family, her friends, and the school in Aleppo where she taught English. Since then, her only goal was to find a way to return to her job and her passion, teaching.
Who can tell me the time again? Wer kann die Zeit sagen?
Just a few months after arriving in Germany, Alaa took an accelerated training course at Potsdam University. Intensive courses in German and teacher training so that she could teach at a German school.
I started to learn German 2 years ago. I took courses at university. Today I'm really happy to be able to work with children again. It's a real pleasure.
Alaa has been awarded a year-long contract as an English assistant at Gelto Primary School. It's a small municipality in Brandenburg, which has observed the migration crisis from a distance. The arrival of this new teacher caused a sensation amongst the students here.
I'm really impressed by her. She managed to come here to Germany to learn German very well, and she was able to come to her school.
It's nice to discover another culture and to meet someone who comes from so far away.
The school's principal, MONIKA NEBEL, believes that by hiring Alaa, she is contributing to the integration of Syrian refugees. And she also benefits, because there is a shortage of qualified teachers in the region.
We offered her the opportunity to complete her training in Germany and to integrate professionally into a country that is foreign to her. Alaa has invested a lot personally to make this happen, and we too invest a lot to make it work. But it's worth it for our region, and it's worth it for her. We gain a teacher, and she gains a job. It's win-win.
As well as Alaa KASSAB, there are about 50 refugees in this integration program at Potsdam University. The pilot project, which was financed by local government, has already seen 12 Syrian teachers gain employment in the region. In this education seminar, the refugees mix with the German students in order to better get to know the country's school system. TONIA and Hassan started their training 3 months ago. Both are from Aleppo and cannot wait to learn German quickly in order to find a teaching job.
For me, it's really important to participate in this program. We learn German very intensively here, and this helps us to understand the German school system. It is not very different from the Syrian school system, but you have to know the differences.
Das ist nicht so viel verschieden von Syrien, aber man muss eine Idee haben.
In Syria, the focus is on the teacher, but here in Germany, it's more common to work in groups. Actually, I think that in Syria, we do not work enough in groups. The students there work, but alone, individually.
This program launched in 2016 and will last for 3 years. The university hopes to obtain funding to extend it because the demand is enormous. More than 700 people have applied for a place on this course. For Alaa, this training was a real boon. 2 years after her arrival, she is now based in Potsdam with a job and is determined to stay.
I thought that it would take me at least 5 years to master the language and to find my way around professionally. I'm surprised that I've managed to complete all this in 2 years.
According to the Migration Office, some 11,000 teachers like Alaa filed asylum applications in Germany in 2016. A potential that remains largely unexplored. Currently, only 3 German universities are actively working to integrate them into the country's schools.
For more on this, I'm now joined in the studio by CELINE SCHMITT. She's a spokesperson for the UNHCR. Hello, thank you very much for coming in. So what's your reaction then to that report and Germany's efforts to integrate refugees?
In fact, that project is very interesting because it replies to a certain number of needs and also recommendations that we've made to invest more in integration of refugees, to invest more in teaching language, because it's very important from the start for asylum seekers, for refugees, to have access to classes, to learn the language, because it's the key to integration. But it also replies to another of the challenges and recommendations that we have is to create links between the host communities and the refugees, and that together they can improve things and they can work together to improve the programs even in Germany. And we could hear from one of the teachers who was comparing the education systems in Germany and in Syria. And by working together, they can just improve the system in Germany. So it's really great, and that's the way to do it.
Now, you were talking about language, learning the language being the key to integration, and earlier in our news bulletin we played a report on efforts here in France to teach migrants French. So key to integration, but how much money is really going towards this here in France?
So the government is organizing French classes for refugees once their refugee status is recognized, 200 hours. But one of our recommendations is that this should be increased. That's not enough. They would need more hours, like more classes to be able to learn French. And that's part of a more generic global recommendation for France, but also in Europe, to invest more in integration of refugees in European countries. So in France, there are NGOs and initiatives also by citizens who are helping refugees to learn French. And I saw the report of the NGO Before Taught who is doing that. Others as well, volunteers are doing it, and it's really great because this is what is needed, and hopefully the number of hours provided by the government can also increase.
But you were saying these hours are provided only to people who have been confirmed, who've been given the status of...
the refugee status.
Refugee status.
Yes.
What about the others?
Yeah. So this is exactly one of the points that we have raised as well when we did the monitoring of the accommodation centers in France. So after the jungle in Calais was dismantled, accommodation centers were opened, and we did the monitoring. And in all the centers, when we visited the centers, people there, asylum seekers, migrants, were telling us, we want to have access to more classes, French classes and trainings, professional trainings. And I think it's important to already organize trainings at that time. So far, it's being done by NGOs, but also volunteers. And it's great because it's creating, again, a link between the host communities and the asylum seekers. But it would be good to have, from the first stage already, some access to French classes, but also training, because it will be beneficial, whatever the result of the asylum claim.
You mentioned that after the camp, the jungle in Calais, was dismantled, people were sent across the country, and you were monitoring that. Can you give us an update on how they're doing generally a few months on?
Mm-hmm. So yes, we visited some 40 centers in France to see how the reception was done, what were the good practices, to also share it with the authorities, but also with the NGOs. So globally, we saw that the refugees, the migrants, were well received in those centers. There was really a goodwill from the NGOs, from the population, from the cities, the local authorities to welcome them. So the majority of them have claimed asylum in France, which shows how important it is to provide accommodation to people and the right information by transferring people to accommodation center, to a safe place where they have access to the right information, but also to healthcare, and they sleep in a bed. It's the right way to be able to give the right information, and then many of them claim asylum, and many of them receive the refugee status.
Now, today the French newspaper Libération has a report on people on the Franco-Italian border in the Alps, people who are suffering from the cold being helped by locals. But, of course, in France, you can get into trouble for that still, can't you?
The situation, yes, is complex. It's not that easy. But one thing that the French government has to do is to be careful about smugglers and to counter the smuggling, because that's the reality in Europe. People are entering Europe in Greece or Italy, and smugglers are using them and to bring them to different countries. So this is something the government is careful about. But then on the other side, people should have the right to claim asylum, and at the border, this has to be ensured as well. And again, as I said, people need to have access to the right information, even at the border, on the possibility to claim asylum. And even though, yes, there is a Dublin regulation, some people may come to France or to other countries because they have family members. And that's also a provision of the Dublin regulation, that family reunification has to be organized. So all of that has to be implemented, and it has to be treated case by case.
And very briefly, if you could, are things better for migrants, for refugees under Macron than they were under Hollande, or worse?
I can't make a judgment like that, but a few things have been done since the previous president, and now again. The number of places in accommodation centres has been doubled before already. Now the new government has announced more resettlement places, including from refugees in countries in Africa. So for people who are refugees in Chad and Niger. And this morning, the first refugees who are being resettled from Chad have arrived in Paris. And we welcome this, but there is still more to be done, more in terms of receiving asylum seekers who arrive here, but also more in sharing the responsibility, including with the countries who host the majority of refugees. And that's also by providing legal pathways to refugees, including through resettlements.
All right, well, I'm glad we had enough time to talk about this thoroughly. It's important that we do. Thank you very much for your time and for coming in today.